Picture this. It's 30,000 years ago, maybe 40,000. Nobody knows for sure. The sun has just set over a landscape of ice and stone. A small group of humans huddles around a fire, the flames pushing back the darkness maybe 20-30 feet at most. Beyond that circle of light, the night is absolute, and in that darkness, eyes are watching, yellow eyes, reflective, moving at the edge of perception. The humans know what's out there. Wolves. The same predators that compete with them for every scrap of meat, every kill, every chance at survival. The same animals that could, if they wanted, tear apart a lone human in seconds. But tonight, something different is happening. One of the wolves moves closer, not attacking, just closer. Maybe there are scraps from the human meal at the edge of the firelight. Maybe the wolf is young, curious, less afraid than its packmates. Maybe it's cold and the fire is warm, a human sees it, makes a choice that will echo through millennia, doesn't throw a stone, doesn't shout. Instead, tosses a piece of meat, not close, just within reach. The wolf takes it, waits, stays, and in that moment, without either species realizing it, everything changes forever. This is the greatest mystery in human history that nobody talks about. Not how we built the pyramids, not how we learned to farm or write or sail across oceans, but how we took our apex predator, an animal that should have been our eternal enemy, and turned it into our best friend. How did wolves become dogs? More importantly, why? And here's the part that keeps scientists awake at night. What if the transformation went both ways? What if dogs didn't just change to fit into human society? What if they changed us too? Changed how we think, how we feel, maybe even how our brains are wired? The evidence suggests something radical. This partnership between humans and dogs isn't just old. It's ancient. Older than agriculture, which is only about 12,000 years old. Older than permanent settlements. Older than pottery or writing or any of the things we think of as civilization. Some scientists now believe dogs have been with us for 40,000 years. Others say even longer, maybe over 100,000 years, which would mean dogs were there during some of the darkest chapters of human survival. If you're listening to this to fall asleep, perfect, that's exactly why I make these. Maybe drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. It's fascinating to me, like Tokyo at dawn, Toronto at midnight, all listening to the same ancient story about firelight and wolves. Think about what this means. For most of human existence, we've had dogs by our sides, not as pets in the modern sense, as partners, co-survivors, fellow travellers through an Ice Age world that wanted both species dead. Every other domestic animal came later. Sheep, maybe 11,000 years ago, goats around the same time, cattle, pigs, horses, all of them domesticated after humans settled down and started farming. But dogs? Dogs were there first. Dogs were there when we were still nomadic hunters living in small bands, barely surviving, moving constantly through hostile territory. And here's where it gets really strange. The domestication of dogs might be the only domestication that humans didn't fully control. With sheep and cattle, we clearly captured wild animals and selectively bred them over generations. But with wolves, the latest research suggests they might have domesticated themselves. That's right. Wolves that were slightly friendlier, slightly less aggressive, slightly more curious about humans, found an evolutionary advantage. They got access to human food scraps. They got warmth from human fires. They got protection from other predators because humans would defend their camps. So the friendliest wolves survived and bred, and their offspring were friendlier still, and over thousands of years, this self-selection process created something entirely new. Not quite wolf, not yet dog, something in between, moving closer to the firelight generation by generation. But evolution never moves in just one direction. If wolves were evolving to tolerate humans, what were humans evolving to tolerate wolves? That's the question that opens up an entirely new way of thinking about who we are and how we got here. Because maybe, just maybe, we didn't domesticate dogs. Maybe dogs domesticated us. Let's go back, way back, to a world so alien it would seem like a different planet. Around 40,000 years ago, maybe earlier, nobody knows exactly when this story really begins, the Earth was locked in the grip of the last glacial maximum. Ice sheets 2 miles thick covered most of northern Europe, Asia, and North America. Glaciers advanced and retreated with the seasons, grinding mountains into valleys, carving lakes that would last for millennia. This wasn't the comfortable, temperate world we know today. This was a world of extremes. Winters that lasted 8, 9 months. Summers that were brief explosions of life before the cold returned. And caught between the ice and the lower latitudes, in that narrow band of habitable land, an incredible diversity of life struggled to survive. This was the age of megafauna. Woolly mammoths migrated in herds thousands strong, their curved tusks sweeping aside snow to reach the sparse grass beneath. Giant ground sloths the size of elephants browsed on tree branches. Cave bears that dwarfed modern grizzlies competed for den sites. Saber-toothed cats stalked prey through forests that would seem impossibly lush compared to the tundra surrounding them. And everywhere, there were wolves. Not the wolves we know today. Not the cautious, human-avoiding animals that haunt the last wild places of the modern world. These were Pleistocene wolves, and they were something else entirely. Grey wolves in the late Pleistocene were apex predators across 3 continents. They range from the ice sheets of northern Europe through the steppes of Central Asia and into North America. Some populations were massive, individuals weighing 150, maybe 200 pounds, built like tanks with jaws that could crack mammoth bones to access the rich marrow inside. They were pack hunters, like their descendants today, but operating at a scale that's hard for us to imagine. Packs of 20, 30 animals weren't uncommon. Coordinated, intelligent, capable of taking down prey that weighed tons. They used sophisticated strategies, ambush hunting, relay pursuit where fresh wolves would take over from tired pack members, strategic targeting of young or weak animals in herds. Archaeological sites from this period tell the story. Mammoth kill sites show wolf tooth marks alongside human tool marks, both species converging on the same carcasses, probably not at the same time, probably warily, each waiting for the other to leave before claiming their share. Because here's the thing, humans and wolves were competitors, direct, unavoidable competitors for the same resources in an environment where resources were desperately scarce. Picture what human life looked like then. Small bands, maybe 20, 30 individuals maximum, extended families plus a few attached specialists, shamans or expert tool makers, living in temporary camps, following game animals as they migrated with the seasons, moving every few weeks or months as resources in an area became depleted. Their technology was impressive by the standards of the time, but incredibly limited by ours. Stone tools, yes, carefully crafted spear points and scrapers and cutting implements. Fire, absolutely. The ability to create and maintain fire was probably the most important human technology. Basic clothing, animal hide sewn together with bone needles and plant fibre thread. But no agriculture, no domestic animals, no permanent structures beyond simple windbreaks and temporary shelters. Every single calorie had to be hunted, gathered, fought, for against an environment that was actively trying to kill you. Starvation was a constant threat. Not abstract hunger, but real starvation. Winters when the game didn't return, when stored food ran out, when people made impossible decisions about who would eat and who wouldn't. Children dying was common. Adults dying in their 30s was normal. The idea of old age, of living into your 60s or 70s, that was rare enough to make someone a repository of knowledge, a living library that the group would protect at almost any cost. And in this desperate struggle for survival, wolves were everywhere, competing for the same prey animals, following the same herds, scavenging the same carcasses, sometimes attacking humans, especially children or individuals who got separated from their groups. The fossil record shows evidence of conflict. Human remains with wolf tooth marks, wolf remains with stone tool cut marks and spear damage. This wasn't a peaceful coexistence. This was competition, sometimes violent, between 2 species that needed the same things to survive. So let's ask the central question, the one that makes this entire story so improbable. Why would these 2 species ever cooperate? What possible advantage could there be in forming an alliance between competing apex predators? It violates everything we know about ecology. Species competing for the same niche don't team up. They fight until one dominates or one goes extinct or they diverge enough that they're no longer competing directly. That's how evolution works. Competition drives separation, not cooperation. And yet, somehow, somewhere, probably multiple somewheres across multiple continents, humans and wolves found a way to work together, to bridge the gap between species, to create the most successful interspecies partnership in the history of life on Earth. The timeline for when this happened is one of the most contentious debates in archaeology. Traditional estimates put dog domestication around 15,000 years ago. The oldest undisputed dog fossils remains that are clearly different from wolves, clearly showing the anatomical changes that mark domestic animals date to about this time. Burial sites where dogs were interred with humans, treated as individuals rather than just food sources, appear around 14,000 years ago in Germany and elsewhere. But genetic evidence suggests something earlier. Much earlier. DNA analysis of modern dogs and wolves indicates the species split somewhere between 20,000 and 40,000 years ago. Some researchers push the date even further back, arguing for domestication as early as 100,000 years ago based on certain genetic markers. The truth is, we don't know. The fossil record from the crucial period is frustratingly incomplete. Early domestication might have left almost no trace. If the first partnerships between humans and wolves were opportunistic, seasonal, temporary, they wouldn't necessarily show up in the archaeological record. A wolf pack that followed human hunters for a season, fed on their discarded kills, gradually became less fearful. That wouldn't fossilize. That wouldn't leave stone tool marks or burial sites. What we know for certain is that by 15,000 years ago it had already happened. Dogs existed. They were different enough from wolves that we can tell them apart in the fossil record. They were important enough to humans that people were burying them with grave goods, treating them as members of the family. But the process probably began much earlier. Thousands of years of gradual change, generations of wolves becoming incrementally more tolerant of humans, generations of humans learning to read wolf behavior, to understand their social structures, to predict their movements and moods. It wasn't a single moment of domestication. It was a slow dance between species, each adapting to the other, each finding advantages in proximity rather than competition. And it started in that frozen world of the late Pleistocene, when survival was so precarious that any advantage, any new strategy, any innovation that provided even a slight edge could mean the difference between a lineage that survived and one that disappeared into evolutionary oblivion. The wolves who participated in this experiment couldn't have known they were creating a new species, couldn't have imagined their descendants would look nothing like them, would range in size from 2 pounds to 200, would live in human homes and sleep in human beds, and the humans who first allowed wolves into their camps, who first threw them scraps, who first looked into those yellow eyes and saw not a threat but a potential partner, they couldn't have known they were starting a relationship that would reshape human civilization, that would change not just how we lived, but how we thought, how our brains developed, how we understood ourselves. But that's what happened. In that harsh world of ice and scarcity, two species found each other, and everything changed. The question is how. How does a predator become a companion? How does fear transform into trust? What were the actual mechanisms, the specific circumstances, the evolutionary pressures that made the impossible happen? That's where the theories begin. And some of them are stranger than you might imagine. Nobody knows how it started. Not really. We have theories, archaeological hints, genetic evidence, but the actual moment when wolf and human first looked at each other and saw something other than threat or prey, that moment is lost to time, happened somewhere between 40,000 and 15,000 years ago, depending on which geneticist you ask and which dog population they're studying. The DNA evidence is messy, contradictory, suggesting multiple domestication events in different locations, or maybe one event followed by extensive mixing and migration. But the mystery of when is nothing compared to the mystery of how. How does the apex predator of the Ice Age, an animal that hunted in coordinated packs and took down prey 10 times its size, how does that animal become humanity's best friend? How do you get from a creature that would happily eat your children to one that would die protecting them? The most popular theory, the one you'll find in most textbooks, is what researchers call the commensal pathway, though most people know it as the garbage dump hypothesis. Picture this. You're living 30,000 years ago at the edge of a human settlement. Not a village, nothing that organised yet, just a seasonal camp where maybe 50 people gather during certain times of year to exploit local resources. Your people are getting better at hunting, and that means waste. Bones with marrow still in them, scraps of meat too small to bother with, organs that nobody wants to eat. All of it gets tossed outside the camp perimeter, creating a permanent buffet for any animal bold enough to approach. Most animals won't. Most animals have a flight distance, a point beyond which human presence triggers immediate retreat. For most Ice Age predators, that distance was measured in hundreds of yards. Get too close to humans and bad things happen. Spears start flying, rocks get thrown. Better to hunt your own food than risk the dangerous hairless apes. But wolves are different. Wolves are adaptable, intelligent, capable of learning from experience across generations. And some wolves, the ones born with slightly lower flight distances, slightly less fear response, they could get closer to the garbage dumps than others. Close enough to grab the best scraps before running off. Close enough to survive lean winters when normal hunting wasn't enough. This created a selection pressure. The bold wolves got more food, survived better, had more pups. And their pups inherited that boldness, that reduced fear response. Generation after generation, the wolves hanging around human camps got progressively tamer. Not because humans were trying to tame them, but because tameness itself became a survival advantage. The beautiful thing about this theory is that it requires no intentional action from humans. We didn't decide to domesticate wolves. We just created an ecological niche, a new food source, and wolves evolved to exploit it. Within maybe 1,000 years, you'd have populations of wolves that looked and acted noticeably different from their wild cousins. Smaller, less aggressive, more comfortable around humans. Proto-dogs. But there's another theory, one that gives humans a bit more credit for intentionality. The hunting partnership theory suggests that the relationship began with mutual benefit, with conscious cooperation rather than accidental selection. Imagine you're a human hunter tracking a herd of reindeer across the frozen tundra. You're good at tracking, at strategy, at using tools, but you're slow. By the time you catch up to the herd, they've scattered. You can only take down one animal, maybe two if you're lucky. Now imagine a pack of wolves is tracking the same herd. They're fast, coordinated, capable of running prey to exhaustion, but they're not great at the killing blow against large prey. They can harass and wound, but bringing down a healthy adult reindeer is dangerous, risky. Wolves get kicked, gored, killed in the hunt. What if both groups realize they could help each other? The wolves drive the herd, the humans make the kill, both groups share the meat. It sounds almost fantastical, like something out of a Disney movie, but we have modern examples of similar cooperation. In Brazil, dolphins and human fishermen work together, dolphins driving fish toward nets in exchange for the ones that escape. In Africa, honey-guide birds lead humans to beehives, waiting patiently while people break open the hives and extract honey, then feeding on the exposed bee larvae. Interspecies cooperation happens. It's rare, but under the right conditions, it evolves. And the Ice Age created exactly those conditions. Resources were scarce, hunting was dangerous, anything that increased success rates meant survival. A few successful cooperative hunts could establish a tradition, a learned behavior passed down through generations of both species. The wolves that were best at cooperating with humans got fed. The humans who were best at cooperating with wolves brought home more meat. Over time, this partnership would select for the same traits as the garbage dump scenario. Reduced fear, increased tolerance, better communication ability. But it would also select for something else. Active cooperation, problem solving, the ability to understand human gestures and intentions, the cognitive toolkit that makes modern dogs so eerily good at reading our emotions. Then there's the orphan pup scenario, probably the most emotionally appealing theory, which is why it shows up in so many popular accounts despite having less scientific support. The story goes like this. A hunting party kills a female wolf and discovers she was nursing. They find the den, find the pups. Most hunters would kill them, but someone, maybe a woman who recently lost a child, maybe a child looking for a playmate decides to bring one home. Wolf pups are absurdly cute. Evolution designed them that way to trigger parental care in adult wolves, but the same triggers work on humans. Big eyes, clumsy movements, plaintive whining, all of it calculated to make mammals want to protect and nurture. A human raising a wolf pup from infancy could create a bond, an individual wolf that saw humans as family rather than threats. This could happen repeatedly over thousands of years. Some of these hand-raised wolves would be aggressive and get killed, but some, the ones born with more neotenous traits, more puppy-like features even as adults, they might integrate into human society, might breed with each other, creating a population of proto-dogs that had been pre-selected for tameness. The problem with this theory is scale. You'd need hundreds, maybe thousands of successful wolf-rearing events to create a viable breeding population, and you'd need them to happen in the same general region during roughly the same time period. Possible, but it seems like a lot of work for a species that was already struggling to survive. But here's where things get really interesting. What if all three theories are right? What if domestication happened multiple times, in multiple ways, with different human populations using different strategies? The genetic evidence actually supports this. Dog DNA shows signs of multiple domestication events, multiple founder populations. Maybe some groups had the garbage dump situation going on, while others were actively cooperating in hunts, while still others were raising orphan pups. Eventually these different proto-dog populations mixed, breeding with each other and with wild wolves, creating the genetic soup that would eventually become all modern dogs. There's even a controversial fourth theory that flips the entire narrative. What if wolves domesticated us? What if the relationship changed human evolution as much as it changed wolf evolution? Think about it. Humans with wolves could hunt more effectively, defend territories more successfully, detect threats earlier. These advantages would create selection pressure on humans too. The groups that were best at cooperating with wolves would outcompete those that couldn't or wouldn't. Over thousands of years, this could have selected for traits that made us better wolf partners, better at reading animal body language, more empathetic, more willing to share resources with non-humans. Some researchers even suggest that the human capacity for interspecies bonding, our weird tendency to treat animals as family members, might have evolved specifically because it helped us work with wolves. In this view, domestication wasn't something humans did to wolves. It was something humans and wolves did together, a co-evolutionary process that changed both species. We domesticated wolves into dogs, but wolves also domesticated us into the kind of humans who could live with dogs. And here's something most people don't consider. Who were the primary wolf handlers in early human societies? Probably women and children. Men were out hunting, defending territory, doing the high-status work that shows up in cave paintings and archaeological remains. Women and children were the ones at camp, the ones managing resources, processing food, maintaining the social fabric. They would have been the first to interact with scavenging wolves, the first to notice that some wolves were less threatening than others, the first to form bonds. There's evidence for this in modern hunter-gatherer societies where dogs are common. Women and children do most of the dog care, the feeding, the training, the social bonding. The relationship is intimate, domestic in every sense. Men use dogs as tools for hunting, but women and children treat them as family members. This suggests that the deep emotional bond between humans and dogs, the thing that makes the relationship unique among all human-animal interactions, might have originated in the domestic sphere, in the daily interactions of mothers and children with increasingly tame wolves. The hunting partnership and garbage dumps might have brought wolves and humans into proximity, but it was women and children who turned proximity into family. We'll probably never know exactly how it happened. The archaeological record can't tell us who first looked at a wolf and saw a friend instead of a threat. The genetic evidence can't reveal whose hand first touched fur without fear, whose voice first spoke in tones of affection rather than warning. Those moments are lost, buried under 30,000 years of time. But each theory reveals something profound about both species. The garbage dump hypothesis shows us that domestication can be accidental, that massive evolutionary changes can emerge from simple proximity. The hunting partnership theory reminds us that cooperation between species is possible, that mutual benefit can overcome millions of years of predator-prey dynamics. The orphan pup scenario highlights the power of nurturing, the way care and empathy can reshape the genetics of entire lineages. And the dual domestication theory, that's the most profound of all, because it suggests that when humans and wolves looked at each other across that first campfire, what they saw wasn't just a potential tool or a potential meal. What they saw was a mirror, another social species, another pack hunter, another creature trying to survive in an impossible world, and they chose partnership over competition. That choice changed everything. So here's the problem with understanding how wolves became dogs. It happened so long ago, maybe 40,000 years, maybe 15,000, depending on which archaeological sites and genetic studies you trust. No written records, no detailed observations, just bones and DNA and educated guesses about what might have happened when our ancestors first started living alongside these predators. For decades, scientists had theories, lots of theories, but no way to test them, no way to actually watch domestication happen in real time. Then came a geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev, and he decided to do something that sounds absolutely insane. He decided to domesticate an animal from scratch and see what happened. The year was 1959. The place was Novosibirsk, Siberia, which, if you know anything about Soviet science during the Cold War, you know this was not exactly the ideal time and place to conduct radical evolutionary experiments. Stalin had died only 6 years earlier, and Soviet biology was still recovering from the disaster of Lysenkism, the state-sponsored rejection of genetics that had set Russian biology back decades and gotten real scientists killed or sent to labour camps. Belyaev was taking a massive risk. His older brother Nikolai had been executed by Stalin's regime for refusing to reject genetics in favour of politically approved pseudoscience. Dmitry knew exactly what could happen to scientists who pursued controversial research. But he also knew that if he framed his work carefully, if he made it look like he was just trying to breed better fur animals for Soviet collective farms, he might be able to study something far more profound: the domestication of animals, the process that had transformed human civilization, and maybe, just maybe, the key to understanding how wolves had become dogs. He started with silver foxes. Not wolves, because Soviet authorities would never approve an experiment with dangerous predators, but foxes, cousins to wolves, members of the same family Canidae, close enough that whatever happened with foxes might tell us something about what happened with wolves 30,000 years ago. The methodology was almost absurdly simple. Take a population of wild silver foxes from fur farms. These were not tame animals. They were terrified of humans, aggressive when cornered, every inch the wild predator their ancestors had been for millions of years. Then select for one trait and one trait only: tameness, not intelligence, not size or colour or any particular physical characteristic, just tameness, the willingness to tolerate human presence without fear or aggression. Each generation, Belyaev and his team would test the juvenile foxes. They'd approach the cages, try to touch the animals, see how they reacted. Most would panic, snarling and backing away. Some would try to bite, but a tiny percentage, maybe the tamest 10%, would tolerate the human contact without extreme fear responses. Those foxes, and only those foxes, were allowed to breed. Then the researchers waited to see what would happen. What happened was magic. Except it wasn't magic. It was biology, but it looked so much like magic that even the scientists were stunned. By the 4th generation, some fox pups were wagging their tails when humans approached. By the 6th generation, they were licking human hands and whining for attention like puppies. Within 10 generations, less than a decade of selective breeding, they had created foxes that behaved less like wild predators and more like domestic dogs. But here's where it gets really weird. The researchers weren't just selecting for behaviour. They were only choosing the tamest individuals to breed. They didn't care what the foxes looked like. They weren't selecting for floppy ears or curly tails or spotted coats. They were only selecting for friendliness toward humans. And yet, the physical changes started appearing anyway. By generation 15, some foxes were being born with floppy ears. Not all of them, but enough to notice. Then came the curly tails, tails that curved up and over their backs like huskies, instead of hanging straight down like wild foxes. Then coat colour variations started appearing. Patches of white-brown spots, patterns that never showed up in wild silver fox populations. Their faces changed too, becoming shorter, rounder, more baby-like. Their legs got shorter. Some developed an extra heat cycle per year instead of the single annual breeding season of wild foxes. They started barking, making vocalizations their wild ancestors never produced. Within 40 years, less than 40 generations, Belyaev had created what were essentially dogs in fox bodies, animals that looked different, acted different, and had different hormonal profiles than their wild ancestors. All from selecting only for tameness. This was the smoking gun that scientists had been looking for. Proof that domestication could happen fast, really fast. Proof that selecting for behaviour could cause dramatic physical changes. Proof that everything we see in domestic dogs, the floppy ears, the varied coat colours, the shortened snouts, all of it could emerge naturally from selecting just for friendliness toward humans. But why? Why would selecting for tameness cause floppy ears and spotted coats? The answer lies in something called the neural crest. During early development, embryos produce a population of stem cells called neural crest cells. These cells migrate throughout the developing body and become all sorts of different tissues. Some become pigment cells in the skin, determining coat colour. Some become cartilage in the ears. Some become parts of the adrenal glands that produce stress hormones. When you select for tameness, you're selecting for animals with less reactive stress responses, animals that don't panic when humans approach. And it turns out that the genes controlling stress responses are the same genes that influence neural crest cell development. So when Belyaev selected for calmer, friendlier foxes, he was inadvertently selecting for foxes with slightly different neural crest cell development, which meant slightly different pigmentation patterns, slightly different ear cartilage that couldn't hold the ears fully upright, slightly different stress hormone production. All the physical changes were essentially side effects of selecting for behavioral changes. This is what biologists call the domestication syndrome, a suite of traits that appear together across many different domesticated species because they're all connected to the same underlying developmental pathways. Dogs have it, cats have it, pigs, cattle, sheep, horses, even some domesticated birds. They all show variations of the same pattern. Floppy ears, curly tails, reduced fear responses, extended juvenile behavior, changes in coat color and patterning, because they all went through the same basic process. Humans selected for tameness, and the physical changes came along for the ride. But Belyaev's foxes revealed something even more profound. The domesticated foxes weren't just physically different. Their brains had changed too. Neurochemical analysis showed they had higher levels of serotonin, the neurotransmitter associated with calm, positive mood states, lower levels of stress hormones, altered development of the parts of the brain that process fear and aggression. Most remarkably, they maintained juvenile behaviors into adulthood. Wild foxes are playful as pups, but they grow serious and solitary as they mature. Belyaev's domesticated foxes kept playing, kept seeking attention, kept behaving like puppies even as adults. This is called neoteny, the retention of juvenile characteristics into adulthood. And suddenly, so much about dogs makes sense. Dogs are wolves that never really grew up. They're wolves trapped in a state of permanent puppyhood, playful and attention-seeking, and emotionally dependent on their human pack members. This isn't a metaphor, it's literally what happened at the neurological level. When ancient humans selected wolves for tameness, they were selecting for animals with extended juvenile periods, wolves that stayed friendly and trainable, and emotionally bonded instead of maturing into independent, aggressive adults. The Belyaev experiment proved that this transformation could happen within decades, not millennia, that the right selection pressure could rewire an animal's brain, alter its stress responses, change its physical form, all from selecting for a single behavioral trait. Now, the ancient domestication of wolves probably didn't happen quite as fast as Belyaev's fox experiment. Ancient humans weren't running controlled breeding programs. They weren't systematically selecting the tamest wolves and preventing others from breeding. The process was probably messier, slower, more complicated. But the fundamental mechanism was the same. Somewhere, somehow, some wolves started tolerating human presence. Maybe they hung around camps scavenging scraps. Maybe humans deliberately fed them. Maybe both. The wolves that were less fearful, less aggressive, more willing to interact with humans had an advantage. They got more food, they survived better, they left more offspring. Generation by generation, natural selection did what Belyaev's team did artificially. It selected for tameness, and all the other changes, the floppy ears in some breeds, the spotted coats, the shortened snouts, the extended juvenile behaviors, they came along automatically. Side effects of rewiring the neural pathways that control fear and stress. Belyaev's experiment is still running today, decades after his death in 1985. The population of domesticated foxes continues to diverge from their wild ancestors. Researchers continue discovering new neurological and genetic differences. Some of the foxes are now available as pets, though they're expensive and still not quite as domesticated as dogs. But the real value of the experiment isn't in creating domestic foxes. It's in revealing the biological mechanisms that created domestic dogs, and cats and pigs and cattle and every other animal that has shaped human civilization. It showed us that domestication isn't mysterious. It's not magic. It's just selection pressure acting on existing genetic variation, producing predictable developmental changes that cascade through behavior, physiology, and physical form. When you look at your dog, you're looking at the result of this process. An animal whose ancestors were systematically selected for friendliness, for reduced fear responses, for the ability to form emotional bonds with another species, an animal whose brain chemistry was altered by thousands of years of living alongside humans. Belyaev proved that the transformation from wolf to dog was possible, not just theoretically, but practically, that the right environmental pressures could reshape a species in evolutionary eye blinks. But he also proved something else, something that would turn out to be even more important for understanding the human-dog relationship. He proved that domestication works both ways. But something else was happening during those early days of human-wolf partnership, something nobody expected, something that wouldn't be discovered until 2015, when a team of Japanese researchers decided to study what happens in the human brain when we lock eyes with a dog. The experiment was simple. 30 humans, 30 dogs, all of them pets with established bonds. The researchers measured baseline oxytocin levels in both species, then let them interact naturally for 30 minutes. Just hanging out, playing, doing whatever dogs and humans do together. The key instruction: make eye contact when it feels natural. After 30 minutes, they measured oxytocin levels again. What they found changed everything we thought we knew about domestication. When humans and dogs gazed into each other's eyes, both species experienced a massive spike in oxytocin. Not a little bump, a 130% increase in dogs, over 300% in some humans. These weren't just significant numbers. These were the kinds of oxytocin levels you see in mothers looking at their newborn babies. Let that sink in for a moment. The same neurochemical system that bonds human mothers to their infants, the most powerful attachment mechanism evolution has ever created, was being triggered by eye contact with a completely different species. The researchers weren't sure they believed their own results, so they ran the experiment again, this time with a control group, humans interacting with hand-raised wolves. Same setup, same time period, same instructions to make eye contact. Nothing happened. No oxytocin spike in the humans, no response in the wolves. The wolves wouldn't even maintain eye contact. In wolf society, prolonged eye contact is a threat, a challenge, something you do right before a fight. The hand-raised wolves had been living with humans their entire lives, but they still couldn't override millions of years of evolutionary programming. But dogs could. Somewhere during the long process of domestication, dogs had figured out how to hack the human bonding system. They had learned to trigger the same neurochemical response that human babies use to ensure their parents will feed them, protect them, love them unconditionally. This wasn't just behavioral adaptation. This was neurological hijacking. Think about what this means. For hundreds of thousands of years, the human oxytocin system had one primary function: bond parents to children. It's the chemical foundation of human family structure, the evolutionary mechanism that keeps mothers from abandoning helpless infants, that makes fathers willing to sacrifice for their offspring. It's so fundamental to human survival that every culture in history, every human society that's ever existed, is built on this neurochemical bedrock, and dogs learned how to tap directly into it. But here's where it gets really wild. The effect isn't one way. When humans look into a dog's eyes and experience that oxytocin surge, the dog experiences it too. Then the dog's oxytocin spike makes it gaze even more intently at the human, which triggers another surge in the human, which reinforces the dog's behavior, creating a feedback loop. A positive cycle of neurochemical bonding that builds stronger and stronger with each interaction. Researchers call this the oxytocin gaze positive loop. It's a self-reinforcing system that literally rewires both species' brains to be more bonded, more attached, more cooperative with each passing day. No other domestic animal can do this. Not cats, despite living with humans for thousands of years. Not horses, not cattle, not even primates raised from birth in human families. Only dogs have evolved this ability to trigger and respond to human attachment chemistry. The question is, how did this happen? The Belyaev experiment gives us clues. Remember those juvenile facial features that appeared in the domesticated foxes? The floppy ears, the shorter snouts, the softer expressions? Those weren't random. They were the physical manifestation of changes to the animal's developmental timing, what biologists call neoteny. The foxes were essentially staying puppy-like even as adults. But neoteny doesn't just affect physical appearance, it affects behavior too. Juvenile animals are naturally more trusting, more playful, more willing to seek interaction with adults. They maintain eye contact with parents because that's how they signal need and receive care. When early humans selected the friendliest wolves, the ones most willing to approach and interact, they were selecting for individuals who had retained juvenile social behaviors into adulthood. And juvenile wolves, like all young mammals, naturally seek and maintain eye contact with caregivers. Over generations, this selection pressure would have created wolves, and then dogs, who were increasingly comfortable with human eye contact. But at some point, something shifted. Dogs didn't just tolerate eye contact, they began actively seeking it out, using it strategically, understanding intuitively that looking into human eyes produced results: food, attention, protection, affection. The dogs who were best at triggering human oxytocin responses would receive the most care, the most resources, the most reproductive success. Natural selection would favor individuals whose gaze could most effectively manipulate human neurochemistry. This is coevolution at its most intimate. Dogs weren't just adapting to human society, they were adapting to human neurology, figuring out how to push buttons in the human brain that even most humans don't know exist. But here's the really profound part. This process didn't just change dogs, it changed us too. Consider what happens to a human population that spends thousands of years caring for another species, not just using them as tools, but actually bonding with them, experiencing powerful oxytocin responses to their presence, forming emotional attachments that mirror parent-child relationships. That population is essentially practicing empathy across species boundaries. They're learning to read the emotional states of non-human animals, to respond to their needs, to consider their welfare alongside their own utility. This is a cognitive skill that doesn't come naturally to most predators. Predators are selected to see other animals as resources, not as individuals with their own needs and feelings. But humans living with dogs had to develop exactly this ability. You can't maintain a working relationship with dogs across multiple generations unless you can understand what they need, what they're feeling, what they're trying to communicate. Some researchers think this is where human capacity for broad empathy first developed. Not from interactions with other humans, we'd always had that, but from the practice of extending care and concern to beings fundamentally different from ourselves. This is the social brain hypothesis applied to human-dog coevolution. The idea that dogs didn't just benefit from human sociality, they enhanced it, pushed it further than it had ever gone before. Think about the evidence. Modern humans who grow up with dogs show enhanced ability to read facial expressions, not just in dogs, but in all animals and even in other humans. They demonstrate higher levels of empathy in psychological testing. They're more likely to engage in prosocial behaviors, helping strangers, volunteering, contributing to community welfare. Neurological studies show that people who've lived with dogs have more developed mirror neuron systems. These are the brain structures that let us simulate others' experiences in our own minds, the foundation of empathy and social cognition. Dog owners' brains literally show structural differences in areas associated with social processing and emotional regulation. Now, this doesn't mean dogs created human empathy. We were already social primates with sophisticated emotional capabilities. But it suggests dogs may have provided a kind of training ground, a safe space to practice extending care and emotional connection beyond our immediate family groups. And this matters because human civilization depends on our ability to cooperate with strangers, to extend trust and consideration to people we're not related to. Most primates can't do this. Chimpanzees are fiercely loyal to their family groups and absolutely brutal to outsiders. But humans build societies of millions, creating systems of cooperation that span continents. Some anthropologists think dogs help teach us how. Not through conscious instruction, but through thousands of years of daily interaction that rewired our neural circuitry for broader, more flexible social bonding. Every time a human child grows up with a dog, they're learning that beings who don't look like them, who don't speak their language, who aren't even the same species can still be trusted companions, worthy of love and care. They're practicing social cognition on a forgiving partner who'll love them back unconditionally. This creates neural patterns that persist into adulthood, making humans more capable of complex social relationships, more comfortable with diversity, more skilled at building bridges across differences. We're not just talking about dogs making people happier, though they certainly do that. We're talking about dogs fundamentally altering human cognitive development, generation after generation, for at least 30,000 years. The implications are staggering. It means domestication wasn't a one-way street where humans shaped wolves into dogs. It was a reciprocal process where dogs were simultaneously shaping us, rewiring our brains, enhancing our capacity for social complexity. We adapted to each other, and in doing so, both species became something neither could have been alone. Dogs became the only animal capable of reading human gestures, following human gaze, understanding human intentions with uncanny accuracy. And humans became the only primate capable of building civilizations that could encompass millions of individuals in cooperative networks spanning the globe, all because we learned to look into each other's eyes and feel the same rush of bonding chemistry that ties parents to children. All because somewhere in the deep past, a wolf and a human decided to trust each other, and that trust triggered a neurochemical reaction that would echo through millennia. But the practical effects of this relationship went far beyond emotional bonding and social development. Dogs weren't just companions who made us feel good. They were technology, tools that gave human populations enormous survival advantages over groups that didn't have them, and the archaeological evidence for this advantage is written across continents in the remains of hunting camps, settlements, and early civilizations. But why? Why did early humans keep wolves around in the first place? The friendship is beautiful, sure, but evolution doesn't care about beautiful. It cares about survival. And here's where the story gets really interesting, because dogs weren't just companions. They were technology. Living, breathing, self-replicating technology that gave humans advantages so massive they literally changed the trajectory of our species. Let's start with the numbers, because the numbers are staggering. A human hunter working alone in Ice Age Europe had maybe a 20% success rate on large game hunts. 1 kill in 5 attempts if they were good. Hunting was dangerous, exhausting, and frequently unsuccessful. You could track a herd of reindeer for days, get close enough for a spear throw and still miss, or worse, wound the animal and watch it escape, taking all that invested energy with it. Now add dogs to the equation. Suddenly that success rate doubles, maybe triples. Dogs could track prey over distances and through conditions that would leave human hunters completely lost. They could detect animals by scent long before humans could see them. They could chase down wounded game that would have escaped a human hunter. Most importantly, they could work as a coordinated hunting pack with their human partners, driving prey into ambush positions or holding large animals at bay until hunters could move in for the kill. The caloric mathematics are brutal and simple. Let's say a human family of 5 needs roughly 10,000 calories a day to survive in Ice Age conditions. That's accounting for the extra energy needed to stay warm and active in sub-zero temperatures. A successful reindeer hunt might yield 100,000 calories of meat and fat, enough to feed that family for 10 days. Without dogs, you might successfully hunt that reindeer once every 2 weeks. With dogs, maybe once every 5 days. That's not just a marginal improvement. That's the difference between slow starvation and thriving. Between watching children die of malnutrition and raising them to adulthood. Between a population that barely maintains itself and one that grows, expands, innovates. And dogs weren't passive tools. They didn't require manufacturing, maintenance, or replacement parts. They reproduced themselves. Feed them scraps from your kills, give them shelter near your fire, and they'd produce new dogs who were already trained by watching their parents work. It was the ultimate self-sustaining technology. The first perpetual motion machine that actually worked. But the hunting advantage was just the beginning. Picture this. You're sleeping in a crude shelter somewhere in Ice Age France. It's deep winter. Outside temperature is 20 below zero. And you're not alone on this landscape. Cave hyenas hunt in packs large enough to take down adult humans. Cave lions are bigger than any big cat alive today. And other human groups, desperate and hungry, might view your camp as a source of resources worth fighting for. Without dogs, you'd have to post human sentries all night. Someone always awake, always watching, burning precious calories just to maintain security. With even 2 or 3 dogs in camp, you could all sleep. Dogs don't just have better hearing and smell than humans. They have threat detection systems that make human awareness look like a crude joke. A dog can hear something moving 250 yards away in conditions where a human would detect nothing. They can smell a predator approaching from downwind when human senses register only pine and snow. And when they detected something, they'd alert. Not quietly, but with barking that would wake the entire camp and potentially scare off whatever was approaching. The archaeological record backs this up in ways that are almost eerie. Human sites with evidence of domestic dogs show significantly fewer signs of violent death than contemporary sites without dogs. Fewer fractured skulls from club blows. Fewer projectile points embedded in human bones. It's like the dogs created a protective bubble around their human families, an early warning system that made surprise attacks nearly impossible. And then there's the warmth. This sounds almost trivial until you understand Ice Age survival. Hypothermia killed more Ice Age humans than predators ever did. Maintaining body temperature in environments where winter temperatures regularly dropped below zero required massive caloric expenditure. Anything that reduced heat loss was quite literally life-saving. Dogs were living blankets. A large dog produces about 100 watts of body heat. Curl up with 2 or 3 dogs in your shelter, and that's 300 watts of heating without burning any fuel. For families living in environments where firewood was scarce or difficult to gather, this wasn't comfort, it was survival technology. The phrase 3-dog night in frontier America referred to nights so cold you needed 3 dogs sleeping with you to survive. Ice Age humans faced a lot of 3-dog nights. Australian Aboriginal peoples used dingoes this way for thousands of years. Inuit peoples relied on sleeping with sled dogs in winter. It wasn't sentimentality, it was thermodynamics. But here's where it gets truly fascinating, where the dog story intersects with one of the biggest mysteries in human evolution. What happened to the Neanderthals? Neanderthals were incredible survivors. They'd been dominating Ice Age Europe for 200,000 years before modern humans showed up. They were stronger, more cold-adapted, with brains actually larger than ours. They were master hunters, sophisticated toolmakers, capable of everything modern humans could do, and in some ways better adapted to the brutal conditions of Ice Age Europe. Then modern humans arrived from Africa around 45,000 years ago. Within 15,000 years, Neanderthals were extinct, every single one, gone from a continent they'd ruled for millennia. What happened? The evidence increasingly points to dogs, not as weapons, but as force multipliers. The earliest solid evidence of domestic dogs appears in the archaeological record right around the time modern humans were expanding into Neanderthal territory, around 30,000 to 40,000 years ago, maybe earlier. The timing is suggestive, almost suspicious. Modern humans with dogs could hunt more efficiently, meaning they could support larger populations on the same territory. They could detect and avoid Neanderthal groups, reducing violent confrontations that might have favoured the stronger Neanderthals. They could survive winters that would have stressed Neanderthal groups without canine partners. They could expand into territories that would have been marginal for humans alone but became viable with dogs doing the hunting, guarding, and warming. This isn't certain. Scientists debate it vigorously. But the pattern in the archaeological record is striking. Sites with evidence of modern humans and dogs show prosperity, population growth, technological innovation. Contemporary Neanderthal sites show increasing stress, declining populations, reduced range. It's circumstantial, but the circumstance is compelling. One study analysed Ice Age sites across Europe and found that human sites with dog remains had 30% more food waste, indicating better nutrition. They also had more diverse artefact assemblages, suggesting more time for innovation and cultural development. When you're not desperately scrambling to get enough calories, you can invent things, create art, develop new technologies. Dogs gave humans that space, that breathing room between survival and thriving where civilization could begin. Think about what this means. We think of technology as things we build, stone tools, wheels, computers. But our first technology, our most important technology, was alive, was a partnership with another species that let us do things we could never have accomplished alone. Dogs were living tools that improved through evolution even as we were using them. They were security systems that needed no maintenance beyond food and shelter. They were hunting equipment that trained itself by watching older dogs work. They were heating systems that reproduced themselves. And unlike stone or bronze or iron, this technology loved us back. It bonded with us, cared about us, worked not just for reward but out of genuine social attachment. We created a tool that wanted to help us, a technology with emotions. No wonder we conquered the world. We weren't alone. We had partners who made us better at literally everything that mattered for survival. Hunting, security, warmth, companionship. Every challenge of Ice Age existence became more manageable with dogs at our side. The archaeological sites tell this story in layers of ash and bone. Sites with dogs show more remains of successful hunts, more evidence of long-term occupation, more elaborate tools and art, more signs of children surviving to adulthood, more prosperity. It's like watching two different human strategies play out across millennia. One group surviving alone through individual strength and intelligence. Another group surviving through partnership, through the revolutionary idea that technology could be alive and that cooperation with another species could unlock advantages beyond what either species could achieve alone. We know which strategy won. We're all here, descendants of those dog-partnered humans. And somewhere out there, millions of dogs descended from those first wolves who decided humans were worth the risk. Imagine pressing fast forward on the story. Tens of thousands of years have passed since the first bold wolves edged closer to human fires. The ice has retreated and advanced again. Human bands have become villages, then towns, then kingdoms. And beside them, shadowing every step, are the descendants of those early camp followers. But if you could see those ancient dogs, really see them, you might be surprised. They wouldn't look like golden retrievers or pugs or huskies. No floppy-eared cartoon mascots. Most of them would look like wolves that got slightly confused halfway through. Middle-sized, prick-eared, lean, brown or grey coats, tails that might curl a bit, faces that could pass for a wolf at a distance until they turned toward you with that unmistakable, searching, human-seeking gaze. For tens of thousands of years that was the dog. Not 100 breeds, not 1,000, just a fuzzy gradient from wolf to wolf-like dog, the same basic template, repeating itself in village after village across Eurasia. And then, very late in the story, something snapped. Or maybe it clicked. Humans stopped merely living alongside dogs. They started sculpting them. What followed was an evolutionary explosion so fast it might as well be a magic trick. A grey wolf genome, tuned by Ice Age survival, was reshaped into the Chihuahua and the Great Dane, the pug and the border collie, the dachshund and the husky. One species, fractured into hundreds of wildly different forms, all in the blink of an evolutionary eye. To understand how that happened, you have to go down to the level of DNA, to the quiet letters that turned a predator of reindeer into a herder of sheep, a guardian of children, a reader of human faces. Because domestication isn't just about behavior, it's a genetic revolution. Start with the most basic question. What makes a dog, not a wolf? At first glance, the differences seem physical. Shorter snouts, smaller teeth, curled tails, spotted coats, floppy ears. The classic domestication syndrome that shows up in foxes, pigs, even rabbits when you select them for friendliness. But under those visible changes, something deeper is going on. Early in the partnership, dogs had to solve a new problem. Not hunting elk in a frozen valley, not even running down prey beside humans. A different challenge entirely. Surviving on human leftovers. As humans shifted from pure hunting to gathering, to farming, to storing food in settlements, a new ecological niche opened up around them. The garbage heap. Bones, skins, spoiled meat, and increasingly grains. Barley porridge, wheat scraps, starchy roots baked in ashes. Stuff wolves weren't exactly built to handle. Modern wolves are carnivores that can digest some plant material, but their digestive systems are tuned for meat. Dogs, on the other hand, show clear genetic changes that suggest something radical happened to their diet. Several genes involved in starch digestion, especially one called AMY2B, which codes for pancreatic amylase, are present in many copies in dogs compared to wolves. More copies usually means more enzyme. More enzyme means better ability to break down starch into usable sugars. In other words, somewhere along the line, wolves that could handle human leftovers, starches, scraps, half-burned bread, had a survival advantage. They were more likely to survive near farms, more likely to raise pups that could also tolerate this strange new food source. Over time, the genes that made starch digestible spread through dog populations. The wolf had begun to move, genetically, from carnivore to opportunistic omnivore, not just in behavior, but encoded in the genome. Your dog's ability to eat kibble or steal a piece of bread from the counter without collapsing. That's the legacy of Neolithic garbage piles. But diet is only the beginning. There's another far stranger adaptation that separates dogs from wolves. Dogs can read us. Not just follow our movements the way a wild predator might watch prey. They can interpret our faces, our pointing, our gaze. They know when we're looking at them and when we're not. They can follow a fingertip to find hidden food, something even our closest relatives, the chimpanzees, often struggle with unless carefully trained. Some of this is learning, but part of it appears to be written into dog DNA. When researchers compare the genomes of dogs and wolves, certain regions keep standing out. Clusters of genes linked to brain development, social behavior, and hormone regulation. Some overlap with genes in humans that are associated with prosocial behavior, social anxiety, or even certain developmental conditions. One particularly intriguing set involves genes related to what in humans is known as Williams-Buren syndrome. People with this syndrome often show extreme sociability and reduced social fear. In dogs, some of the same genomic regions show signs of strong selection. Like evolution grabbed those dials and turned them up or down. The result? Animals that are less fearful of humans, more attuned to our signals, more eager to approach, to engage, to seek eye contact. Look at a wolf. Long, elegant snout, wary eyes that rarely lock onto yours in a soft way. Look at a dog. Shorter face, expressive eyebrows, willing, almost driven to meet your gaze. That ability to read human faces, to hold eye contact without it being a threat, to understand that a pointed finger means look there instead of I'm going to poke you, didn't appear overnight. It emerged through countless tiny shifts, generation after generation, all nudged by a single force: humans. We gave more food, more care, more breeding opportunities to the animals that could tolerate us, understand us, please us. We became the environment their genes had to conquer. But how did this start? Once, twice, many times. The origin story of dogs is still one of the most hotly debated questions in archaeology and genetics. Some researchers argue for a single domestication event. One ancient wolf population, probably somewhere in Eurasia, that started hanging around human groups and gradually became dogs. From there, those proto-dogs spread with humans into Europe, Asia, and beyond. Others see a more tangled story, multiple domestication events in different regions. Wolves in Europe partnering with one set of humans, wolves in East Asia doing something similar with another. Later those lineages mixing, merging, possibly even replacing each other. Ancient DNA has made the picture more confusing and more fascinating. In caves and permafrost across the north, scientists have found remains of canid skulls that aren't quite wolf and aren't quite dog. Some are more than 15,000 years old. A few show shortened snouts and wider brain cases, features associated with domestication. Others look almost like wolves but sit genetically closer to early dog lineages than to any modern wolf. Then there are the famous frozen specimens, puppies pulled from Siberian permafrost, so perfectly preserved that whiskers and eyelashes are intact. When their DNA is sequenced, they don't match any living dog or any living wolf exactly. They seem to come from ancient lineages now lost, relatives of our dogs rather than direct ancestors. It's as if the early stages of domestication weren't a straight line, but a delta. Multiple streams of wolf populations starting to flow toward dog, some merging, others drying up, leaving only traces in the genomes of modern breeds. What most geneticists agree on is that the true separation between wolf and dog probably began at least 15,000 to 23,000 years ago, and possibly earlier. Where exactly that happened, and how many times, is still being argued in late-night conference talks and carefully worded journal articles. But by the time humans settled into farming villages, the dog, whatever complex path it took to get there, was already by our side. For thousands of years after that, dog mostly meant one thing: the village dog. If you walked through a Neolithic settlement, or a Bronze Age town, or a medieval farming village, the dogs you'd see would usually look similar. Medium size, mixed colours, not bred for looks but for usefulness and temperament. They guarded, they scavenged, they herded, hunted, hauled. Their genes were shaped by a mixture of informal human choices and hard natural selection. Animals that couldn't handle the climate, the diseases, the workload, or the people didn't leave many descendants. Local varieties did exist. Sledge dogs in the Arctic, livestock guardians in the mountains, small ratting dogs in crowded cities. But these weren't breeds in the modern sense, with closed stud books and detailed pedigrees. They were regional types, fuzzy biological dialects shaped by the land and the work, not by written standards. Then, astonishingly recently, the rules changed. Over just the last few centuries, really intensifying in the 18th and 19th centuries, humans began to apply something like industrial design to dog evolution. We started keeping records, drawing up breed standards, selecting mates not just for behavior, but for very specific physical traits, a certain ear shape, a particular coat color, a precise body size. We created kennel clubs, held dog shows, closed breeding lines, decided that a dachshund must be long-backed and short-legged, that a greyhound must be aerodynamic and narrow, that a bulldog's face should be flattened and wrinkled. In evolutionary terms, this was like slamming your hand down on the fast-forward button. Within a few human lifetimes, the wolf genome, already reshaped once by domestication, was fractured into hundreds of specialized variants. Sighthounds whose entire bodies are tuned to run, spaniels wired to flush birds into the air, terriers obsessed with going underground after vermin, guardian dogs that imprint on sheep and treat them as family. The village dog gave birth to the show ring, to the purebred, the pedigree, the carefully labelled breed. And the irony is almost poetic. The vast majority of dog evolution happened without anyone writing anything down, without closed registries or formal standards. Yet the most visually dramatic changes, the ones that make a pug look nothing like a husky, happened under tight human control in an incredibly short time. We became, quite literally, the sculptors of another species' body and mind. It's tempting to think of this as a one-way story. Humans shaping dogs. But look closely at your own species for a moment. At our genes for starch digestion, which expanded as we domesticated grains. At our immune systems, reshaped by living near livestock and their germs. At our brains, bathed in oxytocin when we look into the eyes of a friendly animal. When we bred dogs to digest our food changed. When we selected dogs for reduced aggression, we created safer camps, settlements and towns, where children could grow up with furry companions who taught them empathy, responsibility and comfort. When we rewarded dogs for reading our faces, we also rewarded ourselves for being readable. The genetic revolution that turned wolves into breeds wasn't just about dogs becoming more like us. It was about us becoming the kind of humans who live with dogs, the kind who talk to animals as if they understand, the kind who organize parts of their lives around feeding, walking, protecting a creature that can never speak our language, but somehow understands our hearts. Every time a new breed was carved out of that ancient wolf template, another small thread was added to the web tying our species together. A herding dog made it easier to manage flocks, which made it easier to support more people, which made it easier to build villages, towns, cities. A guarding dog made it safer to store surplus grain, to sleep a little deeper at night, to risk investing in the future. A companion dog made it easier to bear loneliness, loss, the crushing weight of civilization's demands. So when you look at the modern kaleidoscope of dog breeds, at the tiny teacup animals and the massive guardians, the sleek racers and the shaggy clowns, you're not just seeing what we did to wolves. You're seeing what wolves allowed us to become, partners in a shared genetic experiment still unfolding by the light of the fire. When your ancestors finally stepped out of the Ice Age and into something like stability, the wolves who had chosen to walk beside them came too. Only by this point they weren't really wolves anymore. Their faces had softened, their bodies had shifted, their instincts had been rewired by thousands of tiny human decisions about who to feed, who to trust, who to keep. And as humans moved from wandering hunters to settled farmers, from scattered bands to cities of stone and brick, dogs came with them into this new world. They didn't just survive the rise of civilization, they climbed its ladders with us step by step, until some of them ended up not just in our homes, but in our myths, our temples, our visions of the afterlife. In some cultures they guarded our front doors. In others they guarded the gates of heaven and hell. Imagine one of those early villages on the edge of the agricultural revolution. Mud walls, thatched roofs, the smell of grain drying in the sun, chickens scratching in the dust, goats tied to rough wooden posts. The people living here had done something astonishing. They had taken wild grasses that barely clung to poor soils and turned them into wheat and barley. They had taken wiry, skittish goats and sheep and turned them into walking banks of meat, fat, milk and wool. But domestication always creates a problem. You're concentrating resources, food, animals, tools, children, all in one place, and the rest of the world notices. Wolves, big cats, thieves from the next valley over. This is where dogs become more than just hunting partners. They become infrastructure. A dog sleeping at the edge of the camp is a primitive alarm system. It doesn't need a philosophy of property rights. It just has to know, these are my humans, this is my territory. That shape moving in the dark doesn't smell right. A growl, a bark, a flash of teeth, and suddenly the village has a living perimeter defense. Other dogs discover new jobs, following herds, nudging stragglers back to the group, moving like living pressure waves around flocks of sheep and goats. Early herding dogs turned scattered, nervous prey animals into a single coordinated resource that humans could move, trade, and protect. This is the pastoral revolution. Once, your ancestors followed animals. Now, animals followed your ancestors, and dogs made the difference between chaos and control. In this world of early fields and flocks, dogs become extensions of the human nervous system. Extra eyes at night, extra ears in the distance, extra teeth on the edges of the herd. Every successful harvest, every lamb that doesn't get taken by a predator, feeds back into the partnership. Humans who work well with dogs leave more descendants. Dogs who read human signals better, who show just the right mix of independence and obedience, leave more puppies. But as villages grow into towns and towns into cities, something else starts to happen. Humans begin to think about the world not just in terms of survival, but in symbols. The night is no longer just dangerous. It is sacred, mysterious, populated by gods, ghosts, and judges of the dead. And the dog, who has always walked with us into the dark, steps into those myths too. Travel now in your imagination to the banks of the Nile. The air is hot and dry, the river glittering in the sunlight like a living vein of water carved through the desert. In the temples of ancient Egypt, artists are carving a strange and powerful figure into stone. The body of a man, the head of a canine. Long ears, narrow snout, watchful eyes, Anubis. To the Egyptians, dogs and their wild cousins were scavengers of the edges. They patrolled the boundary between the village and the desert, between the world of the living and the barren lands where nothing grows. They saw bodies. They smelled decay. They knew, in their own way, what death looked like. Anubis becomes the god who guides souls through that same boundary. The divine embalmer, the psychopomp leading the dead to the scales where their hearts will be weighed against the feather of truth. Notice what this means. The same animal that guards your mud brick house at night is imagined standing at the door of the afterlife, guarding that threshold too. The Egyptians even buried dogs with their people, sometimes as beloved companions, sometimes as offerings to Anubis. The message is clear. If you have to walk into the dark unknown, it's better not to go alone. Far to the west, in the world of Greek myth, dogs take on a different but related role. Here, at the edge of the underworld, stands a monstrous hound, Cerberus. Usually 3-headed in the myths that survived, sometimes 50-headed in older versions, his job is simple and terrifying. He keeps the living out and the dead in. Cerberus is not a pet. He is the weaponized idea of a dog. All the loyalty turned inward toward Hades. All the ferocity turned outward at anything that doesn't belong. Yet beneath the horror is a familiar pattern. Humans imagining that when you reach the most important boundaries, the gate to Hades, the entrance to the afterlife, there will be a dog there, watching, deciding, enforcing the rules. Travel east again, to ancient China. Here, in front of palaces and temples, you find pairs of stone guardians, often called, quote, zero in the West, though they're really stylized lions. They still carry strong canine energy in popular imagination. Muscular, sharp-toothed, one paw resting on a globe or a cub, they sit frozen in stone, eternally mid-growl. They embody a familiar idea, that the entrance to any important space, home, temple, imperial court, should be flanked by protectors with canine-like vigilance. Even when the animal is technically a lion, the psychological role is dog-shaped. Loyal, alert, dangerous to intruders, safe to those inside. Again and again, across cultures, dogs or dog-like beings are placed at thresholds, the border of the village, the entrance to the temple, the gates of death. But the story of dogs in human civilization isn't just about the spiritual realm. It's also written in blood and iron, in hooves and marching feet, in the chaos of battlefields. Once humans began to organize for war, dogs didn't stay behind. In many ancient societies, war dogs were literal weapons. The Assyrians depicted massive, muscular dogs on their reliefs, straining against leashes, used to charge enemy lines. The Romans outfitted some dogs with spiked collars and armour, turning them into living missiles of muscle and teeth. In other places, dogs acted less like shock troops and more like living sensors, runners ahead of columns, sentries that never slept properly, always one sound away from alert. Imagine a night before a battle, somewhere in the ancient world. Two armies facing each other across a plain, campfires dotting the darkness like red eyes. The humans try to sleep, clutching spears and swords, but the dogs don't. They pace, they sniff the wind. One bark at the wrong time, and a sentry is alerted, a patrol is sent, an ambush is avoided. Sometimes civilizations turn on the outcome of such tiny moments. A dog hearing a footstep, a growl in the dark. Fast forward through centuries, through gunpowder and cannons, through trenches and barbed wire. The dog is still there. In the world wars of the 20th century, dogs carried messages across shell-blasted landscapes. They located wounded soldiers by scent alone when human eyes were useless in the smoke and chaos. In more recent conflicts, military canines have become specialists in detection. Explosives, weapons, even hidden humans. Notice what hasn't changed. The dog remains an extension of the human sensory field. Where we are blind, they see. Where we are nose deaf, they smell. Where we hesitate, they run. But at some point in this long history of work and war, another transformation begins. Gradually, in some places and classes, dogs start to step away from purely functional roles, hunting, herding, guarding, fighting, and into a new category, companions. Animals who work, if they work at all, primarily on the human heart. It doesn't happen everywhere at once. For most of history, most dogs are working animals. But in the villas of ancient Rome, wealthy citizens keep small lapdogs, bred more for pleasant company than for practical use. In medieval Europe, nobles and ladies of the court pose with tiny spaniels and toy breeds in illuminations and tapestries. Something subtle but profound is changing. A hunting dog that fails to hunt is a failure. A guard dog that won't bark is useless. But a companion dog? Its job is to sit by the fire, to warm your feet in a draughty stone hall, to look at you like you are the centre of its universe. This shift accelerates in the later Middle Ages and the early modern period. Urbanization concentrates people into crowded cities where fewer households need a full-time livestock guardian or a dedicated hunting hound. Some dogs still drag carts, guard warehouses, and chase rats in ship holds, but others become status symbols and emotional anchors. You can trace this transformation in stories about individual dogs. Take Peritas, the legendary dog of Alexander the Great. According to later accounts, Peritas was no pampered lapdog. He fought beside Alexander in battle, supposedly saving his life in at least one desperate encounter. When Peritas was killed, Alexander is said to have founded a city in his honour. Whether every detail is true or not, the story reveals what people thought possible. A bond so deep between a man who believed himself godlike and a dog that he would commemorate it in brick and stone. Jump forward many centuries to Scotland to the 19th century. Here we meet Greyfriars Bobby, a small Skye Terrier whose story became legend. When his owner, a night watchman named John Gray, died and was buried in Greyfriars Kirkyard, Bobby reportedly spent the rest of his life, about 14 years, keeping watch at his master's grave. Townspeople fed him. The local authorities eventually paid for his license so he wouldn't be destroyed as a stray. A fountain and statue were erected in his honour. Whether every detail is perfectly accurate matters less than what the story expresses. Humans saw in Bobby the ultimate expression of what they already believed about dogs. Unshakable loyalty, even beyond death. And then there is Hachiko, in early 20th century Japan. Hachiko, an Akita, would accompany his owner, Professor Hide Saburo Ueno, to Shibuya Station in Tokyo every morning and return each afternoon to greet him. One day, the professor died suddenly at work and never came back. Hachiko did. For nearly 10 years, he returned to the station every day, waiting on the platform where we used to see his human appear. Commuters noticed, vendors fed him, newspapers wrote about him. After he died, a bronze statue was raised outside the station. Once again, the pattern repeats. Humans look at a dog's simple, persistent behaviour, returning to the same spot, following the same routine, and see something cosmic in it. Devotion, faithfulness, a kind of love that feels purer than our own, As you move through history, you can read human values through the ways we treat dogs. In rigid aristocratic societies, dogs are sorted into classes just like people. Noble breeds for noble hunters, ratters for the poor, tiny toy breeds for the ladies of the court. In pastoral cultures, dogs are evaluated almost entirely on usefulness. Can you keep the wolves away? Can you move the flock? In societies obsessed with order and control, dogs are trained for obedience, discipline, and precision. Police canines, military dogs, guard dogs. In more individualistic urban cultures, dogs become extensions of personal identity. The stylish city dweller with a sleek greyhound, the outdoors enthusiast with a rugged shepherd, the family with a golden retriever whose main job is to be a furry sibling to the children. At each step, the dog is a kind of mirror. It reflects our fears of thieves, of enemies, of the unknown in the dark. It reflects our hopes for loyalty, for love that doesn't judge, for protection that never sleeps. It reflects our power when we breed animals into dozens, then hundreds of forms to suit every imagined purpose. And it reflects our tenderness when we let an aging dog sleep in a warm corner years after its practical work is done, simply because we cannot bear to part with it. From the edge of the campfire to the gates of the underworld, from fields of wheat to marble palaces, from the chaos of battlefields to the quiet, patient wait at a train station, dogs have moved with us through every phase of civilization, adapting not just to our environments, but to our stories about ourselves. They have been hunters, herders, soldiers, guardians, offerings, symbols, and saints of a sort, and through it all one thread runs unbroken, a creature that looks into human eyes and seems to say, in every language and every era, the same simple thing. Where you go, I go. Picture this. You're lying in a hospital bed. The room smells faintly of disinfectant and plastic. Machines beep softly in the background, measuring heartbeats, oxygen levels, the silent statistics of survival. Nurses move in and out like careful ghosts. Then the door opens and something changes. 4 soft paws, a loose, easy tail, a wet nose, a pair of eyes that meet yours and hold, not with clinical interest, but with that strange, ancient attention that dogs have given humans for tens of thousands of years. Your breathing slows a little, your heart rate drops. The machines, indifferent but exact, record the shift. To you, it feels like comfort. To a scientist, it's data. For most of human history, the bond between people and dogs was a mystery wrapped in myth. We told stories about loyalty, sacrifice, ghostly companions waiting at crossroads between worlds. Now in Murray machines and hospital corridors, in genetics labs and quiet therapy rooms, we are finally starting to measure what that bond actually is. And the numbers are weirder than anyone expected. Start with the nose. Human noses are decent. We can tell when dinner is burning, when the rain is coming, when the trash needs to go out. A dog's nose is something else entirely. If you imagine the smell world as a vast high-definition landscape, humans are seeing it on a flickering old black-and-white television. Dogs are walking through it in virtual reality. Depending on the estimate, a dog's sense of smell may be tens of thousands of times more sensitive than ours. Their noses can pick up the faintest traces of volatile compounds, individual scent molecules floating in the air like tiny messages. When we domesticated wolves, we didn't just adopt a hunting partner. We inherited a biochemical sensor. Over the last few decades, researchers started asking a simple question. If dogs can smell game animals across snowfields, what else can they smell? The answers are unsettling. In carefully controlled trials, certain dogs have been trained to detect cancers, lung, breast, ovarian, even prostate, by smelling breath samples, urine, or tiny bits of tissue. In many of these studies, their accuracy rivals high-tech lab equipment. Sometimes they flag samples that tests say are normal, and later, those patients are found to have early-stage disease that machines missed. From a dog's point of view, it's just another scent profile. Healthy cells smell one way. Cancer cells, metabolically chaotic, leaking unusual chemicals, smell slightly different. The dog learns the pattern and locks it in. To us, it looks like magic. To them, it's just smell. The same thing is happening with seizures. Some people with epilepsy report that their dogs act strangely minutes before an episode. They pace, whine, paw, insist on contact. Scientists wondered, is this chance? Or are the dogs picking up something? It turns out they probably are. Subtle shifts in body odor, tiny chemical changes in sweat or breath, micro movements in posture and muscle tone, signals we can't even name, much less sense. Well-trained seizure alert dogs can sometimes give warnings several minutes before an attack, enough time for a person to sit down, call for help, swallow medication. And it doesn't stop there. Dogs appear to detect shifts in blood sugar in diabetics, oncoming migraines, even faint changes in human emotion. Walk into a room stressed, heart pounding, cortisol high, and your dog will often know before anyone else does. To a biologist, this is not surprising. For tens of thousands of years, wolves that were good at reading human states had an advantage. They could anticipate hunts, avoid conflict, move in when we were calm, keep their distance when we were volatile. Over time, selection would favour those who were best at decoding us, our faces, our movements, and yes, our smells. What we're just now beginning to grasp is how deeply that decoding runs, and how much it has shaped us in return. Because the bond is not a one-way street, hook a human and a dog up to monitors, and something elegant emerges. When we interact positively, gentle touch, soft words, eye contact, both partners experience a rise in oxytocin, the so-called, quote, zero. It's the same molecule that strengthens the connection between mothers and infants, between lovers, between close friends. We didn't know this until very recently. For most of history, we just felt calmer around our dogs and shrugged. Now there are numbers, lowered blood pressure, reduced heart rate, decreases in stress hormones like cortisol. Longitudinal studies suggest that, on average, dog owners may live longer, with lower risks of cardiovascular disease. You can think of a dog partly as a living, breathing stress regulation device, co-designed by natural selection and human culture. When we reach out to stroke a dog, ancient feedback systems come online automatic. Muscles unclench, breathing deepens. The brain releases a little chemical reward for social contact across species lines. Even the simple act of walking a dog ripples outward. Regular movement, sunlight, social interaction with neighbours. All the mundane, boring, health-promoting things that modern life often erodes. Studies have found that dog owners are more likely to meet recommended activity levels, less likely to report severe loneliness, more likely to recover emotionally after major life stress. These are averages, not guarantees. Not every person, not every dog. But the direction is clear. In a world of pills and therapies and apps, one of the most effective health interventions is still a creature that curls up at your feet. Modern medicine has started to notice. In veterans' hospitals, you can now find dogs trained to help with PTSD. Their tasks sound simple. Wake a person from a nightmare, create a physical boundary in crowds, interrupt spirals of anxiety by nudging, leaning, insisting on touch. But behind these tasks is something deeper, the constant presence of a being who watches you without judgment, who doesn't flinch when you startle, who doesn't demand explanations for why you are the way you are. For some trauma survivors, human faces have become potential threats, puzzles they no longer trust themselves to solve. Dog faces are different. They carry a kind of emotional grammar we have been co-evolving with since the Ice Age. Soft eyes, tilted head, the slow blink. The easy yawn of a creature that is relaxed enough to sleep beside you. Children on the autism spectrum who may find human social cues overwhelming or unreadable often connect more easily with dogs. Therapists build entire programs around this, practicing gentle touch, taking turns, reading another being's comfort signals. The dog becomes a bridge, a first safe conversation with a social world that feels chaotic and sharp. In cancer wards and long-term care facilities, therapy dogs pad quietly from room to room. Their visits correlate with lower reported pain levels, improved mood, sometimes even faster recovery. Again, these are correlations, not miracles. No dog can cure disease, but they can change the internal weather, how a person feels, how they cope, whether they still feel like a person or just a patient. For all this, we still wondered, for a long time, what is happening inside the dog? Do they see us as parents, pack leaders, food dispensers, strange hairless wolves? Do they actually feel anything like what we call love? You can't ask a dog in words. But you can slide them into an MRI machine, train them to lie very still, and watch which parts of their brain light up when they smell their human, hear their voice, see their face. Over the last decade or so, A small revolution in canine neuroscience has done exactly that. The results are startlingly consistent. When dogs are exposed to cues from their primary human, scent, sound, sight, reward centers in the brain activate. The same regions that respond to food, to play, to other pleasurable experiences. Even more intriguing, some studies suggest that for certain dogs, the smell of their human may trigger stronger responses than the smell of food. The human, in other words, is not just associated with resources. The human is the resource. Brain scans also show that dogs process human emotional sounds, laughing, crying, in ways that look surprisingly similar to how we process them. They are attuned, not just to what we do, but to how we feel. That doesn't mean they understand emotion in a human reflective sense, but it does mean that when you are sad, your dog isn't just reacting randomly. They are picking up a pattern their brain is wired to care about. All of this paints a picture. Two species whose nervous systems have been quietly tuning to each other for a very long time. And that brings us to a less comfortable part of the story. If our bond with dogs is this deep, this biologically entangled, then it isn't just about what they can do for us. It's also about what we owe them. Modern dogs live in worlds their wolf ancestors could not have imagined. Tiny apartments instead of forests, leashes instead of open tundra, echoing city streets instead of quiet snow. We have bred them into every imaginable shape. Faces too flat to breathe well, spines too long for their own weight, joints that fail, hearts that enlarge, brains too big for the skulls that hold them. We did this partly out of affection, partly out of aesthetics, often without understanding the cost. Bulldogs who cannot give birth without surgery. Cavalier King Charles Spaniels predisposed to painful brain conditions. Giant breeds that live heartbreakingly short lives. When you look into a dog's eyes and see that familiar, searching focus, you are seeing the end product of tens of thousands of years of mutual selection. They are, in a very real sense, designed to take us into account, to orient to us, to fit into human stories. The question modern science quietly poses is, are we doing the same for them? Ethicists argue that our responsibilities run deeper than food, water, and basic medical care. A being whose brain is wired to need social contact, to work, to solve problems, to move, can suffer in ways that do not leave visible scars. Chronic boredom, social isolation, confusion about inconsistent rules. A dog that spends most of its life alone in a yard, or locked in a crate, is not simply low maintenance. It is a social mammal deprived of its primary evolutionary context, cooperative life alongside humans. As we learn more about their cognition and emotion, the ground quietly shifts. Dogs are no longer background characters in the human story. They are partners whose welfare is intertwined with our choices, which makes the next paradox even stranger. We live in a time of accelerating technology. Our homes hum with processors and sensors. We build artificial intelligences, virtual assistants, companion robots shaped like seals or cats. In theory, we could design a perfect synthetic pet, silent, clean, hypoallergenic, programmable. No vet bills, no muddy footprints, no grief when they die. And yet, even as robotic companions improve, the number of real dogs in human homes continues to grow in many parts of the world. In dense cities, in high-rise apartments, in places where walking a dog at midnight means weaving through neon reflections and traffic noise. Why? Part of the answer may be chemical. A machine can mimic behaviors, but it does not yet trigger the same ancient oxytocin loops, the same cascade of hormones that a warm body, a living gaze, a familiar scent can evoke. Our brains are attuned to fur, to breath, to small movements in sleep. Another part may be narrative. Dogs pull us out of the abstract world of screens and symbols and into something older and slower. The rhythm of walks, the tracking of seasons through shedding coats and muddy paws, the brief, sharp heat of grief when 15 years of companionship finally comes due. Most of all, though, the alliance persists because it is not perfect. Dogs do not always obey. They chew the wrong thing, bark at the wrong time, get sick, grow old. They require us to rearrange our lives, to wake up early, to leave work on time, to structure our days around another creature's needs. In a world increasingly optimized for convenience and control, they reintroduce friction, and that friction may be exactly what our nervous systems, evolved on open plains beside watchful wolves, still quietly crave. The modern science of the human-dog bond is full of graphs and p-values and brain images. It tells us that dogs can smell our cancers, predict our seizures, ease our trauma, extend our lives. It reveals neural circuits lighting up in patterns that look suspiciously like affection. But beneath the data, something older moves. When your dog shifts in sleep, twitching as if chasing something through dream snow, when they lift their head at the faintest sound of your footstep in the hallway, when they settle with a sigh at your side after a hard day, you are watching an alliance older than agriculture, older than writing, older than most of the stars we can name. We can measure it now. We can plot its curves and sequence its genes. But we're still, in some deep sense, sitting at the same shared fire we always have. One species telling stories, the other listening, eyes half closed, ears never quite at rest. Picture this. You're sitting in a quiet room. Maybe it's night. Maybe there's rain against the window or just the distant hum of a city falling asleep. And somewhere nearby, there's a dog. Maybe it's yours. Maybe it's one you remember. Curled in a circle that seems mathematically perfect. Chest rising and falling with the slow tide of deep sleep. Every so often a paw twitches, a muffled woof slips out, like an echo of some ancient hunt playing out behind closed eyes. Now notice what happens in you. Your shoulders loosen just a little, your breathing subconsciously matches theirs. A tiny part of your brain, the very old part, files a quiet report. All clear, pack is safe, no predators, you can rest. We like to think we're the ones in charge of this relationship. We buy the food, we open the doors, we decide when to walk, when to play, when to go to the vet. In the story we tell ourselves we are the masters, and dogs are the domesticated dependents circling our feet. But if you watch closely, really closely, the story gets stranger. Because dogs are not just pets, they're mirrors, and what they reflect back at us is our own nature, softened and clarified by 40,000 years of shared history. Think about how a dog reads you. You walk through the front door after a long day. You say nothing. You force a smile. You do all the things modern humans do to hide how they feel. Your co-workers might not notice. Your friends might not notice. You might not even fully admit it to yourself. But your dog knows. Before you speak, before you take off your shoes, before you've even decided what kind of mood you're going to pretend to be in, they've already taken a full emotional scan. Heart rate, breathing pattern, micro-tension in your shoulders, the way your footsteps hit the floor. To them, you are a walking weather system, and they are exquisitely tuned barometers. If they trot over lightly, tail loose and sweeping, you know you must look calm, or at least calm enough. If they hang back, ears low, eyes searching your face as if to ask, is it bad? Is there danger? You get a raw, unedited reflection of what you're actually projecting into the world. In that moment, they tell you who you are more honestly than most humans ever will. That's the first lesson dogs teach us. We are not purely rational, modern creatures floating above our biology. We're still pack animals whose moods ripple outward, whose nervous systems sync to those around us. Dogs reveal this because they respond to the parts of us we don't control consciously. The tension in our hands, the tremor in our voice, the pace of our breathing. In a way, a dog sees the real you first and the social mask second, and it goes deeper. We like to imagine that we domesticated wolves, that we bent a dangerous predator to our will, that we reached out, tamed the wild, and created this soft, friendly creature that sleeps on our couch. But look again. Domestic dogs have rewired how humans live. They've changed when we sleep, where we settle, how we hunt, how we farm, how we police, how we grieve. They made night safer, hunting more efficient, property more secure. They took our raw social instincts, the ones forged in that tiny bottleneck of a few thousand survivors, and amplified them. Dogs hijack our reward systems with eye contact and touch. They pull oxytocin, the hormone of bonding, trust and parental care, out of storage and pour it straight into our bloodstream. They make us coo in high-pitched voices we usually reserve for infants. They nudge us outside for walks, regulate our routines, drag us into the present moment. Who is domesticating whom? A philosopher might say that we entered into an ancient contract. Not a written one, not even a spoken one at first. A biological contract written in body language and shared risk. We would give them food, protection, and a place in our social world. They would give us early warning of danger, help in the hunt, warmth on cold nights, and a kind of emotional feedback that would push our nervous systems toward cooperation and calm. Over tens of thousands of years, the contract evolved. We selected for friendliness, playfulness, responsiveness. They selected for humans who could read their signals, learn their cues, feed them, shelter them, and tolerate their presence in our most intimate spaces. People who hated dogs, or couldn't read them, missed out on the survival advantages that dog-human teams offered. People who felt that little spark of joy in canine company stayed in the game. By that logic, dogs have been training us just as much as we've been training them, training us to attend to nonverbal signals, to interpret other minds, to practice empathy across species lines, to soften displays of aggression, to reward calm behavior, not just dominance. In domesticating dogs, we may have domesticated ourselves. We became a little less sharp-edged, a little more tolerant of proximity, a little more sensitive to the needs of others. A species that could share a fire with a former predator is a species nudged one step further toward cooperation, storytelling, and civilization. And now, standing on the edge of a new age, we have to ask, what happens to this ancient contract in the future we're building? Right now, somewhere in a laboratory, researchers are tweaking the genomes of mice, extending their lifespans, altering their diseases. In principle, the same tools, CRISPR, gene editing, selective breeding informed by molecular maps, could be applied to dogs. There are already projects, cautious and controversial, aimed at slowing canine aging, modifying metabolic pathways, tweaking growth factors. The dream is simple and heartbreaking. What if dogs lived not 10 or 15 years but 25 or 30? What if a child could grow up and grow old with the same dog? But every wish has a cost. Longer life might mean more cancer, more arthritis, more years of frailty. Altering one set of genes could affect behavior, cognition, the subtle glow of dogness we recognize instantly but struggle to define. Make a dog too long-lived, too intelligent, too self-aware, and you begin to cross an invisible line, from companion animal to something more like a non-human person. Would the contract still hold if the dog at your side could remember your childhood in perfect detail when you're old and forgetful? If they could outlive multiple generations of your family, carrying memories forward like an oral historian of a single household? On the other side, what if we start editing behavior more precisely? Dialing down aggression, dialing up affection, fine-tuning every trait to match our preferences. Design a dog not just by breed but by personality template. At some point you have to ask, are we honouring the ancient partnership, or are we turning a fellow traveller into a custom-made emotional appliance? The truth is, we don't know where the line is. We're only beginning to grasp the complexity of the wolf that became a dog and the human that became whatever we are now. But we do know this. When we look into a dog's eyes, we are seeing 40,000 years of shared history compressed into a single gaze. Not just the history of dogs, but the history of us. We see the hunter, calculating the wind, scanning the horizon, the herder, watching the flock, the soldier on night watch, the child at the edge of the fire, the old woman leaning on a stick, the trader on the road, the farmer in a field, and next to almost all of them, if you look closely enough, is a dog. They remind us of what we used to be, small bands of primates on a dangerous planet relying on each other and a few trusted non-human allies to make it through the night. They remind us of what we still are, social animals wired for connection, soothed by warmth and closeness and shared vigilance. They show us our capacity for loyalty, for care that crosses genetic lines, for grief. The way people mourn their dogs with a depth that surprises even them tells us something profound. We're capable of loving fiercely beyond self-interest, beyond language, beyond species. They also show us our capacity for cruelty and neglect. The abandoned dog, the chained dog, the fearful dog flinching at a raised hand. These are indictments of us. A mirror held up to the parts of human nature we prefer not to see. The parts that take the gift of trust and break it. But even there, dogs teach. A rescued animal relearning to trust, to play, to sleep deeply again, demonstrates something we're still fumbling to master. The slow rebuilding of safety after harm, the return of calm after trauma, the idea that nervous systems, human or canine, can be coaxed back toward ease with patience, consistency, and kindness. In watching them heal, we're quietly reminded that we might be able to do the same. So, Are we their masters? Legally, yes. Practically, often. We hold the leashes, sign the paperwork, pay the bills. But in a deeper sense, the word master doesn't quite fit. Partners might be closer, or co-conspirators. Two species that made a bet on each other and won. Because out of all the possible evolutionary paths, out of all the predators that hunted near our fires, only one decided to come closer instead of staying away. And only one species of primate responded not with relentless fear or hostility, but with curiosity, food scraps, and eventually a space by the flames. We chose each other. And that choice has shaped everything that came after. Our cities patrolled by police dogs, our farms guarded by shepherds, our modern apartments filled with sleeping companions who do nothing useful except keep our ancient brains from feeling alone in the dark. If you strip away the technology, the lights, the walls, what remains is a very old scene. A patch of ground lit by flickering fire. Beyond it, darkness and the unknown. At the circle's edge, a figure with forward-facing eyes, long limbs, a mind full of plans and fears. Beside them, a four-legged silhouette, ears pricked toward the night, nose sampling the wind. The human watches the forest. The dog watches the human. Each takes their cue from the other. Tens of thousands of years later, not much has changed. When you turn off the light and your dog circles 3 times before lying down, you're reenacting a ritual older than any civilization. When they sigh and press their back against your feet, they're not just seeking comfort. They're completing a pattern that started when wolves and humans first agreed, silently, to share the same pool of warmth. That first fireside meeting is still echoing. In every wag when you come home, in every alert bark at a strange noise, in every quiet night made just a little safer by the sound of another breathing body nearby. And as you drift towards sleep, with or without a dog in the room, a faint imprint of that ancient contract lingers in your nervous system. The knowledge, buried deep and wordless, that somewhere in our long improbable story, we were not alone in the dark. We had help. We had them. So now we've walked the trail all the way from the ice-bright eyes of those ancient wolves to the soft weight of the dog who might be curled up beside you right now. A creature who snores and dreams and kicks their paws in their sleep, but who is also the product of one of the strangest and most powerful experiments in evolution the world has ever seen. Think back to that first meeting at the edge of the firelight. A nervous wolf, ribs showing through its winter coat. A human camp, hungry, exhausted, watching the darkness for moving shapes. Between them, a narrow strip of safety, a place where fear and curiosity had to wrestle each other to a standstill. From that thin line of shared courage, an entire world unfolded. Generation after generation, we changed each other. We selected wolves without knowing the word selection. We rewarded the ones who were calm, who wagged their tails, who didn't flinch at a raised hand. In return, they rewired our nervous systems. They tuned our brains to puppy eyes and playful bows. They smuggled oxytocin into our social lives, nudging us to trust more, to care more, to build tighter communities. We domesticated them. They domesticated us. Over thousands of years, their bodies bent toward us. Shorter snouts, floppy ears, spotted coats, the strange baby-faced features of neoteny. At the same time, our inner landscape bent toward them. Neural pathways for reading subtle social cues. Hormonal loops that light up when we hear a friendly bark or feel a warm head rest on our knee. Every time a child throws a ball and a dog races after it with wild devotion, you're seeing the fossil record made flesh. Not in stone, but in behavior, in trust, in the wordless agreement, run with me, and I will run with you. Tonight, or whenever you're listening, your dog might just be another shadow on the floor, a vague shape near the bed, a rhythmic sound of breathing in the corner of the room. But inside that quiet body is an echo of the first brave wolf that stepped a little closer to the fire and didn't run. The cautious sniff of smoke lives on in the way your dog approaches something new and strange. The sprint across an ice-age plain survives in the blur of fur when they chase a ball or a leaf in the wind. The decision to trust a different species entirely is there every time they roll over and expose their throat and belly, saying, "I believe you won't hurt me." Those first wolves are gone, dissolved into time. The camps they circled are buried under cities, fields, and oceans. But the relationship they began never stopped. It passed from paw to hand, from litter to litter, from one pair of eyes meeting another across the darkness. A single thread of cooperation, stitched through tens of thousands of years. You are part of that story. Just by existing in a world with dogs, by sharing your life with one, by feeling that strange deep comfort when they settle beside you and sigh. As you drift towards sleep, you can imagine the fire dimming, the stars moving slowly overhead, and a circle of humans and dogs resting side by side. The specific faces change, the landscapes change. Ice sheets come and go, cities rise and fall, but the pattern remains. Predators and primates turned into partners, two species keeping watch for each other at the edge of the dark. Thank you for walking this long path with me tonight, through ice and ash and campfire smoke, all the way to the quiet room where you're listening now. It means a lot that you've chosen to spend this time exploring the secret history of dogs and how they helped remake us. If you'd like to keep traveling through stories like this, you can gently tap like or subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. And if you feel awake enough, you're very welcome to leave a comment and share where in the world you're listening from, and maybe who's curled up beside you. I love reading those, and they help shape future episodes. There's also an optional YouTube membership for those who want to support the channel a little more directly. It's never expected, always completely optional, but it does help me keep making these long, quiet dives into deep time for you. For now, you don't have to do anything. You can just let your eyes close if they haven't already. Feel the warmth of your own modern fireside. Listen to the breathing of any animal nearby, or the soft hum of the room. Somewhere far behind you, a wolf steps into the circle of light. Somewhere ahead of you, another human and another dog lie down to sleep. The story continues. The fireside is endless. Rest well.